How will you begin or continue to see and feel, bring to light far more of yourself, who you really, beautifully and so one of a kindly are? Cast off the cloaks of whatever you're not or thought you had to be. Find and live the unlived, undiscovered parts of your life, the buried treasures of your body, mind, heart, waiting to be discovered and embraced, honored and expressed. Pose big, beautiful questions to yourself, ones ready to reshape you just by courageous asking, honest pondering, starting from your soul. Begin new conversations, fresh and freeing conversations, with and without words, with the world around you, the people, the earth, and humanity around you, and those you've outworn or have worn you out. Kindle your deeper passions and compassions, from glowing embers to roaring bonfires. Reimagine how much more is possible, dreamable, where the world is your oyster, full of pearls. Revisit what is, in this here, this now, most natural, vital, joyful, what brings you alive. Maybe the music of Brahms or birds, the taste of true love, friendship, sunlight, because another future is calling for you to enter, for you to begin. Welcome to everyone leaning in to this 37th floating poetry broadcast, the very last of the year's weekly series. I had planned to conclude last week for 2020, then felt we could use and ought to have one final program before the new year unfolds. Coming to you live over the airwaves and ocean waves from Watch Hill, Rhode Island, on a moonlit coastline. This is your guide, your poet and poetorialist Colin Goedecke, inviting you this week to think and feel into different dimensions of endings and beginnings, from the cultural, the emotional and natural, to the relational, imaginal, spiritual, and more. Well, I felt my way into a mosaic of seekings, of musings and lyricizings for us to ponder across endings and beginnings we experience as individuals, as a society, as a humanity, in our bodies, our hearts, consciousness. There's so many directions you, me, we could go on around this twin theme. Here's some of the territory I thought we'd take it for now, and you can take it beyond in your own ways, shapes, and forms from here after this. Endings and beginnings of ways of thinking and being, of significant relationships, of lives, of livelihoods, of life's chapters, adventures, of stories and histories, of harvests, of deeper meaningfulness of each day you and I are here, get to be here. And I have some questions for us. Are you, or how are you, recognizing your beginnings, your various endings, important ones, inner ones especially, and outer ones, from each new season or harvest of your life to each new season of nature, the beginnings or the endings of loving, of friendships, the openings or closings of deeply held dreams and desires? What about freely opening to them, fully allowing them to come or go? What about celebrating or appreciating them all as life gifts, revelations, invitations, or initiations, great or small? To me, the more we can embrace each of them, embody them, and honor them for adding to our growth, our wisdom, our wholefulness, the richer and more resonant I believe our days can be. So let's venture together into to these realms and see what arises, what sparks or challenges or affirms or inspires you. Well, in our medley of choosings, I thought we'd start with great movie endings. This is from Mental Floss, and I just chose a few of my favorites and some that you might well know or know of. Citizen Kane, 1941. Well, on a surface level, his masterpiece, Orson Welles' Citizen Kane, would seem to have an extremely simple if tragic ending. Wells's doomed tycoon, Charles Foster Kane, utters a dying word, Rosebud. And later the audience is shown that the word referenced the sled he played with as a boy just before his life was thrown into upheaval. A straightforward elegy for lost innocence, yet decades after its release, and despite countless re-examinations of the film, we're still talking about Rosebud and its many meanings as a component of memory, nostalgia, and the way we both control and lose control of our own narratives in life. It remains a puzzle, very much worth playing with, even if we can never fully solve it. And the next one was the one I was nipping into there, Casablanca, 42. We tend to think of Hollywood endings as universally happy things, particularly when it comes to romance, but Casablanca, one of the most recognizable classics from Hollywood's golden age, has been flouting that conventional perception for decades. Rick and Ilsa's bittersweet goodbye remains one of the most famous romantic moments in all of film history. And by the way, if you've never seen the film or that slice of it, definitely iconic and memorable. I've seen it many, many times. Well, this was made even more powerful by its refusal to give the audience what they want. Instead, we get what we need, and the combination of Ingrid Bergman's passion and Humphrey Bogart's resolve sells the whole thing. Just one more for fun. Also, who remembers The Planet of the Apes, 1968, Charlton Heston, featuring horrified Charlton Heston screaming at the ruins at the end of the Statue of Liberty he comes upon, is one of the most referenced, parodied, and commented on endings in all of cinema history. It's so recognizable you probably know what it is, even if you haven't seen the film, but it just didn't reach that status because it's a memorable image. It's a payoff to a rather direct metaphor for a world gone mad that works almost as well today as it did amid the Cold War. So, yeah, we all have, there are many others. I'm sure we each have our favorite films and endings. And there's a few, maybe spark you toward others. How about famous opening lines in literature? I've chosen some of mine. You, again, may have yours to remember. Grimm's Fairy Tales. Once upon a time. Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities opens this way. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. Many of you, if you've read Moby Dick, Herman Melville's great classic, opens, Call Me Ishmael, about the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Or Franz Kafka, The Metamorphosis. As Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic insect. E.B. White from Charlotte's Web. Remember that from childhood? Where's Papa going with that axe? Said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. And from A Clockwork Orange, Anthony Burgess, it was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. And last, H.G. Wells from The War of the Worlds. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own, that as men busied themselves about their various concerns, they were being scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. I was thinking of other things too, maybe not exactly literary, but letters. And there's a wonderful program from England, Letters of Note, and they've been also doing a weekly or other intermittent newsletter, and they share some of the letters notable people have written to other people. And I loved how Louis Armstrong ended his letters. They had a little commentary on that. He was as distinctive in this as his music, and he rarely ended his letters without flair. Was determined to wave goodbye on the page with a wink. So here's just a few of how he ended them. Swiss Chrisly yours, Satchmo. That was from a 1940 letter he wrote. Well, Swiss Chris was his favorite laxative, and Satchmo was his nickname, of course, short for satchel mouth. Another one. Am ulceratedly yours, Louis Armstrong, from a letter from 1950 where he thought he had stomach ulcers. Yours soulfully, old Satchmo. Another one, 1944. Am Pluto waterly yours, Louis Armstrong, from a letter writing to someone, and that referenced Pluto water was another laxative of the day that he used. He was a connoisseur of them, apparently. And another one last. Am red beans and ricely yours, 1952. Love that. That fun. So we can end our letters more colorfully, and personally more, meaning more particularly you. I was thinking of events that have that are all the more inviting and exciting because they are so finite, they're so fleeting. And the 4th of July is one of those for many of us. And here's a poem of mine about that. Let the fireworks begin. The star showers, the wild flowerings, the palm trees and peonies, dahlias, chrysanthemums of high-flying light, the waterfalls of sparks, colors, the bright night burnings embering down into dark, the flashes and shimmers of earth-flung comets, bracelets, diadems, the rocketing arcs you follow with wide-open eyes, almost held breath till you oh and ah from the outbursts of silver and gold, emerald, rose, rare blue. Feel the ensuing booms reverberate in your belly as you lie face to sky on a widespread blanket, easy and cozy with friends, and savor all amid the dangling spangles and whizzing, crackling, whistling sounds with innocent wonder. Through the last fanfare, the blazing, rousing finale, the applause, the drifting clouds of smoke and contented crowds. Obviously, we think of, at least I do, beginnings and endings. I think, and we'll touch on this a little more in a moment, but I think of certainly birth and death and all sorts of things in between, and older phases of life, or as some of us get older, ideally also wiser, but our age progresses. So I came across in Brain Pickings wonderful piece about the writer Grace Paley, who considered some of the practicalities of old age and said, you may begin to notice that you're invisible, especially if you're short and gray-haired. But I say, to whom, and so what? All the best minorities have suffered that and are rising nowadays in the joy of righteous wrath. She said also, my father had decided to teach me how to grow old. I said, okay. My children didn't think it was such a great idea. If I knew how, they thought I might do so too easily. No, I said, it's for later, years from now, and besides, if I get it right, it might be helpful to you kids in time to come. They said, really? My father wanted to begin as soon as possible. Please sit down, he said. Be patient. The main thing is this. When you get up in the morning, you must take your heart in your two hands. You must do this every morning. That's a metaphor, right? Metaphor? No. You can do this. In the morning, do a few little exercises for the joints, not too much. Then put your hands like a cup over and under the heart, under the breast, he said tactfully. It's probably easier for a man. Then talk softly, don't yell. Under your ribs, push a little. When you wake up, you must do this massage. I mean, pat, stroke a little. Don't be ashamed. Very likely no one will be watching. Then you must talk to your heart. Talk? What? Say anything, but be respectful. Maybe say, heart, little heart. Beat softly, but never forget your job. The blood. You can whisper also. Remember. Remember. Well, thinking about that led me to think about Sam Shepard and his last book, written just a few weeks before he passed away. He was a remarkable fellow and writer and actor and playwright and more. And it's called Spy of the First Person. When you read it, you realize that he's actually feeling like he's spying on himself in a way. And he's ruminating on his end because he knows it's coming. And he says in this one short chapter, which is really just one page, one paragraph, where exactly do we come from? That's one question. Was it a desert? Was it a forest? Was it a mountain? Was it the prairie? Where do we actually come from? The Colorado River? If you were traveling in a foreign country and you lost your dogs and you lost your car and you lost your note from home that your mother pinned on your collar and you lost your clothes and you were standing there naked and somebody came up to you and said, "Where do you belong?" How would you answer? Would you ask the one ancestor who happened to be Portuguese? Or would you ask the Spanish Armada? Somebody has forgotten. So all of this as a journey, yes, of beginning to end or a beginning to an end. The journey of life is something that, of course, all living creatures go through. And I love, and I've read once before in another context, the David Whyte poem, Song for the Salmon. It's so beautiful and fitting, I feel, for our beginnings and endings conversation and exploration today. Song for the Salmon. For too many days now I have not written of the sea, nor the rivers, nor the shifting currents we find between the islands. For too many nights now I have not imagined the salmon threading the dark streams of reflected stars, nor have I dreamt of his longing, nor the lithe swing of his tail toward dawn. I have not given myself to the depth to which he goes, to the cargoes of crystal water, cold with salt, nor the enormous plains of ocean swaying beneath the moon. I have not felt the lifted arms of the ocean opening its white hands on the seashore, nor the salted wind, whole and healthy, filling the chest with living air. I have not heard those waves fallen out of heaven unto earth, nor the tumult of sound and the satisfaction of 1,000 miles of ocean giving up its strength on the sand. But now I have spoken of that great sea. The ocean of longing shifts through me. The blessed inner star of navigation moves in the dark sky above, and I am ready, like the young salmon, to leave his river, blessed with hunger, for a great journey on the drawing tide. Song for the Salmon. Thank you, David Whyte. So on these lines, I've also been reading more of Stephen Jenkinson's incredible book, The Coming of Age, The Case for Elderhood in a Time of Trouble. And it's all about, obviously, aging and elderhood and what that really means and what would be good for us to have and used to have in cultures before and time before. If you give the first act of your life over to the notion that you were born to some purpose or other and that there are reasons for your birth and they attend you, then your task seems clear enough. Find out why. Risk censure and accusations of self-importance and bombast and find out why you were born and try living accordingly. Somewhere along the way, you will enter the second act of your life, usually without notice or fanfare or a parade down the main street of your days. It'll only be apparent in hindsight that you've done so. This isn't a time to reap the rewards of the seasons of your life. There are new reasons for living that can come to you only at this point in your life. In some, they might come down to this one thin thing. With whom are you to live out these reasons for your birth and life? Who shall be the witnesses, the heirs, the beneficiaries of the reasons for your life? The answer just cannot be the gated community of your peers. It can't be. Your crew has to include people half your age, a third your age, and they're young. They are the ones who stand a chance of drinking the wine that might come from the vineyard you planted as you sought your life's purposes. There's that to consider once you start not being young anymore. Of course, they might never taste wine in their lives. Not if you haven't lived and planted the vines as if they'd one day appear. If you persist with the whys of your early days well into your second act, and if you keep looking for the payday and the amen that you're sure has so far eluded you, younger people might never know the deep red rush of a human life. They'll be your competition for that rush instead. There's that to consider too, along with whatever plans you've made for retirement. All right, sip of winter water. J.B. Priestley said, "I have always been delighted at the prospect of a new day, a fresh try, one more start, with perhaps a bit of magic waiting somewhere behind the morning." And I was reading a wonderful interview from the Paris Review done back, I think, in 1990 with the great poet, writer Octavio Paz, and on the eras of history as they come and go. The interviewer asked him, you were born in 1914, as you probably remember. He says, "Not very well." Interviewer, "Virtually in the middle of the Mexican Revolution and right on the eve of World War I. The century you've lived through has been one of almost perpetual war. Do you have anything good to say about the 20th century? Paz says, "Well, I have survived, and I think that's enough. History, you know, is one thing, and our lives are something else. Our century has been terrible, one of the saddest in universal history, but our lives have always been more or less the same. Private lives are not historical. During the French or American revolutions, or during the wars between the Persians and the Greeks, during any great universal event, history changes continually, but people live, work, fall in love, die, get sick, have friends, moments of illumination or sadness, and that has nothing to do with history, or very little to do with it." Interviewer, "So we are both in and out of history?" Paz says, "Yes, history is our landscape or setting, and we live through it, but the real drama, the real comedy also, is within us. And I think we can say the same for someone of the 5th century or for someone of a future century. Life is not historical, but something more like nature." I've also been reading Patti Smith's book, Year of the Monkey, and here she's speaking about our successions of yesterdays and tomorrows. "I knew there had to be a brass telescope mounted somewhere on the boards, and I was determined to find it. Not exactly a telescope, but an instrument of beyondness, right on the esplanade. My pockets were brimming with coins, so I set up camp and concentrated, first on a freighter, then on a star, and then all the way back to Earth. I could actually see that ball. The world. I was in space and could see it all, as if the god of science let me peer through his personal lens. The turning earth was slowly revealed in high definition. I could see every vein that was also a river. I could see the wavering illness air, the cold deep of the sea, and the great bleached reef of Queensland, and encrusted manta rays sinking, and lifeless organisms floating, in the movement of wild ponies racing through the marshes, overrunning the islands off the Georgian coast, and the remains of stallions in the boneyards of North Dakota, and a fleet of deer the color of saffron, and the great dunes of Lake Michigan with sacred Indian names. I saw the center which was not holding, and I saw the ancient days. There were bells tolling and wreaths tossed and women turning in circles, and there were bees performing their life cycle dance, and there were great winds and swollen moons and pyramids crumbling and coyotes crying and the waves mounting, and it all smelled like the end and the beginning of freedom. And I saw my friends who were gone, and my husband and my brother. I saw those counted as true fathers ascend the distant hills, and I saw my mother with the children she had lost, whole again. And I saw myself with Sam in his kitchen in Kentucky, and we were talking about writing. in the end, he was saying, everything is fodder for a story, which means, I guess, that we're all fodder. Another set of reading I've been doing is the New View magazine from the UK. A lot of it to do with the thinking or philosophy of Rudolf Steiner back in time, 100 years back. And this fellow, Richard Ramsbotham, was writing based on, as I thought about the great pause we're in on so many levels imposed upon us as a people for the first time in history, and a possible, an end it could portend, which was sparked by him writing this, that we're at the risk of a cultural cataclysm. And he referenced Rudolf Steiner, who wrote in 1920, so 100 years ago exactly, who wrote it 100 years ago, nothing in fact depends on economic life. Primarily everything depends on the views, the ideas, the cultural life of humankind. So he speaks to that and he says, well, where are we with this today? What is the condition of our free, independent cultural life, without which the whole social organism and even economic life, quote, must fall into decline? We are, as even the briefest look at our current situation will tell, in a dire situation. Theaters closed, religious services forbidden, concerts forbidden, singing forbidden, gatherings or meetings forbidden, public lectures impossible, workshops impossible, smiling or laughing impossible with masked faces, education masked, at an antisocial distance from one another or online. Each of these is a disaster story with colossal implications, and I apologize for the many things I have not mentioned, but the list could go on and on. Freedom of speech is forbidden in public media with heavy fines and consequences for saying anything other than the accepted viewpoint, and so on and so on. So, of course, it ought to concern all of us, everything that's happening, and all I can say and hope for is that may we turn a vital corner soon ahead for the sake of our humanity, you, me, and all of us as a people, as a species. Certainly hoping for that. Well, how about when we think of not just seasons of life but seasons of nature and the things that it brings us? So I came across from Alice Waters' wonderful cookbook, vegetables. So there's the edible glories of each season, like corn in summer. The first corn, if you love corn and you know how exciting it is when it first appears in a summer, especially here in the Northeast. And I loved how she opens the whole section of things to do using corn, but the first fresh sweet ears of the summer's corn crop reach us in June from farmers in Southern California. And I'm sure she's talking about her restaurant, Chez Panisse, that she had. The Chino family takes justifiable pride in the corn they send us early in the summer from their farm outside San Diego. They grow as many as 15 or 20 kinds, never tiring of experimenting with new and old varieties and hybrids. When the first corn arrives by air freight, we sometimes offer it in the cafe by the ear, grilled on the cob. One pun-loving maitre d' of ours used to insist on listing corn on the cob on the menu as, quote, buccaneer corn, because we sold it for $1 an ear. And there was a poet I enjoyed years back. I said, I've got to find that piece because it was tied into the delights of eating in season and corn and other things. And this poem of his, I did find it actually today. An ode to End of Summer Wonder for the table. September, it's called, Tom Disch, D-I-S-C-H. Slice the earth anywhere, and like a plum cake it yields one thumbful after another of late estival yumminess. Yams and more yams, tuberous boobs of a subterranean Cybele, discovering herself fan by fan, shovel by shovel, to the insatiable gaze of the whistling, worshipful clods who call aloud the litanies of cookbook and bawdry crisp potato skins, steamed ears of corn ripe, tomatoes steeped in virgin olive oil. The votive ovens glow like flesh, our hearts and mouths are full of praise and sweet potatoes. I thought of the feelings we have in different seasons and within different seasons, and the subtleties, and ones I know as a poet and being I'm ever more attuned to, and that led me to Evan Boland's poem, The Ichil Woman. She came up the hill carrying water. She wore a half-buttoned wool cardigan, a tea towel round her waist. She pushed her hair out of her eyes with her free hand and put the bucket down. The zinc music of the handle on the rim tuned the evening. An Easter moon rose. In the next-door field, a stream was a fluid sunset, and then stars. I remember the cold rosiness of her hands. She bent down and blew on them like broth, and round her waist on a white background in coarse woven letters the words, glass cloth. She was nearly finished for the day, and I was all talk, raw from college, weekending at a friend's cottage with one suitcase and the set text of the court poets of the Silver Age. We stayed putting down time until the evening turned cold without warning. She said good night and started down the hill. The grass changed from lavender to black. The trees turned back to cold outlines. You could taste frost. But nothing now can change the way I went indoors, chilled by the wind, and made a fire and took down my book and opened it, and failed to comprehend the harmonies of servitude, the grace music gives to flattery and language borrows from ambition, and how I fell asleep oblivious to the planets clouding over in the skies, the slow decline of the spring moon, the songs crying out their ironies. Thank you, Evan Boland. All right, another sip. A little more parched than usual tonight. I recently had read a winter solstice poem, because those are such endings and beginnings of their kind, the equinoxes and solstices. Here's one for an autumnal equinox. This is my piece, Leave the Calendar Behind. Let the pages loose to fly off in the first autumn breeze. Instead of reading what day, month, season of the year it is, step outside. Feel into the air, the changing light, the landscape before you, around you. Let them tell you where things are. Like the equinox now, balancing in, balanchining in as you attend. Let your body pivot naturally and your thoughts glide gently away from fleeting summer toward fan-faring fall. Witness everything cooling down, everything spooling out in clear light, in soon-to-come pageant colors, fragrant scents, abundant textures. Accept the invitation to rise with, like the evening star. Take the offered hand of nature and enter together into its widely alive and enlivening theater. So there we have feelings of autumn. And here's one around spring, which is the next look toward thing for all of us now that we're in winter, the next season, and its promise. And here's this poem for us when the clock strikes spring for the spring equinox. When the clock strikes spring, you stop, whatever you're doing. Take a long, deep breath, then another. Take off your shoes and socks or stockings. Take yourself out into the open air as it begins its softening, onto the outleafing earth as it begins its blossoming, under the lengthening sun as it begins its farewell to winter warming. Let all your senses feel the first notes, the fresh with promise notes of another greening time enter through your eyes and ears, nose and skin, your stirring heart, unwinding mind, when the clock strikes spring. Well, what about the beginnings and ends of each day we have? They're in their own right such gifts of nature, aren't they? Mary Oliver's poem Sunrise speaks to that. You can die for it, an idea, or the world. People have done so, brilliantly, letting their small bodies be bound to the stake, creating an unforgettable fury of light. But this morning, climbing the familiar hills in the familiar fabric of dawn, I thought of China and India and Europe, and I thought how the sun blazes for everyone just so joyfully as it rises under the lashes of my own eyes, and I thought, I am so many. What is my name? What is the name of the deep breath I would take over and over for all of us? Call it whatever you want. It is happiness. It is another one of the ways to enter fire. Thank you, Mary Oliver. And for me, sunrise is ever paired with birdsong, and so often I hear it first before I see it. Listening to the sunrise. The morning sun must be rising. Under the covers, eyes closed, I listen to the long and short-toned sounds of birds chiming like bedside clocks, rousing the world from its dreams. Here's Galway Cannell's Ode to Daybreak, to Day Rise. It's called Daybreak. From his collection, Mortal Acts, Mortal Words, marvelous collection. On the tidal mud, just before sunset, dozens of starfishes were creeping. It was as though the mud were a sky, and enormous, imperfect stars moved across it as slowly as the actual stars cross heaven. All at once they stopped, and as if they had simply increased their receptivity to gravity, they sank down into the mud. They faded down into it and lay still, and by the time pink of sunset broke across them, they were as invisible as the true stars at daybreak. Sunset, I'd venture to say, for most of us are special, often magical. The color, the mood, the endless associations we have with them, and pretty much, as far as I have had them all, entirely positive, very uplifting, very soothing, beautiful. One August in East Hampton years back, this poem swam into me. It's called Sunset Swim. A salty absolution by the seaside at the end of a sweltering day. Waves breaking from shaded water into banks of white hydrangea. A sand-barred floor soft under sea-dancing feet. Clarified water cool and renewing as I wade, then plunge under the last gold and pink light of day, dissolving into night. Another moment was out on Fire Island on the Great South Bay with some dear friends. We went clamming. And while we were clamming, I was poeticizing. Ankle deep, Jones Beach Island. This poem, Sunset Ripples. Sunset ripples out from the horizon, where a cloud curtain has gone up. It ripples at a soft right angle across the salted water, encircles our wrists, our waiting ankles like beaten gold bracelets, as we zenly reach down together through the low tide, for clams lying cool and quiet in the Great South Bay. The soon unshelled center of a serendipitous Saturday feast of good men, women, wine, and willing mollusks. There's a book I've read many times and couldn't find. I'd get another copy of it, and it's Italo Calvino's book, Mr. Palomar. He's a keen observer of things, and he's a friend of the universe. The book opens, the inscription is, to a man who is a friend of the universe is a friend. Well, I live by that. I love that. And he's one of those. And this is part of a longer chapter called The Sword of the Sun. When the sun begins to go down, its reflection takes form on the sea. From the horizon, a dazzling patch extends all the way to the shore, composed of countless swaying glints. Between one glint and the next, the opaque blue of the sea makes a dark network. The white boats, seen against the light, turn black, lose substance and bulk as if they were consumed by that splendid speckling. This is the hour when Mr. Palomar, belated by nature, takes his evening swim. He enters the sea, moves away from the shore, and the sun's reflection becomes a shining sword in the water, stretching from the shore to him. Mr. Palomar swims in that sword, or more precisely, that sword remains always before him. At every stroke of his, it retreats and never allows him to overtake it. Wherever he stretches out his arms, the sea takes on its opaque evening color, which extends to the shore behind him. As the sun sinks towards sunset, the incandescent white reflection acquires gold and copper tones, and wherever Mr. Palomar moves, he remains the vertex of that sharp, gilded triangle. The sword follows him. All right, well, I thought we'd have a bit of a dip into birth of a literal kind, and we know that there are others from, births of a career, births of ideas, the birth of a work of art, a movement, a nation, and there's just being born. And I have one poem I'd written for twins that were born to friends of mine back in 2004, Sarah and Craig Durham Weiner, and their twins, Kate and Abigail. So they'd be 16 and change. Entering the Atmosphere was the poem for them. At an appointed hour, after floating for hundreds of nights together in the humming twin engine over many unknown landscapes soon to be familiar to their feet and sight, the door to the outer world opens, and, ready to descend, they sail forth, hearts fluttering, ripcords pulled, into the embracing air and the wild blue yonder of life and earth, and soft landings at the side of their milk-warm mother and wide, smiling father. I'm just slipping a couple out of my hand, things to read, because I want to keep to a certain time together tonight, not to run too far over what I had in mind for us. I read an earlier David Whyte poem, and he wrote one about death and the endings. The ending through a death is something poets of people of all kinds have written about, writers through all time, and contemplated, and as have the rest of us. And here's his poem on this universal passage, and nothing poignant too as we think about, through loved ones, at least for me, not very directly, but those who've been lost recently for a lot of different reasons. Beautiful spirits just now departed. His poem, News of Death. Last night they came with news of death, not knowing what I would say. I wanted to say the green wind is running through the fields, making the grass lie flat. I wanted to say the apple blossom flakes like ash covering the orchard wall. I wanted to say the fish float belly up in the slow stream, stepping stones to the dead. They asked if I would sleep that night. I said I did not know. For this loss I could not speak. The tongue lay idle in a great darkness. The heart was strangely open. The moon had gone, and it was then when I said, he is no longer here, that the night put its arm around me, and all the white stars turned bitter with grief. The fact of our eventual end, whenever it comes, is humbling and, for me, enlivening. I'd been watching a program, I think it was The Crown, some years back, or one episode or something, and I was taken with the wonderful man, character playing the king, and he was dying, ultimately, and it led to this poem back in 2017. There is an end. Even kings must pass away. Royalty only goes so far. Mortality rules all in the end. I think on the realizing of that finishing line as I watch a story of England's King George VI, especially the moment he learns he's terminally ill and will not last long, certainly not the lifetime he imagined. I feel in him, in me, the bitter sweetness about that rare yet fleeting place of being in the world, whether we know it firsthand or not, a place to hold dear, however long or short we're here. So, that too, and how to be at peace with the impermanence of life, because it's all impermanent, to accept its nature, its naturalness. Here's a poem I wrote out on the Puget Sound in Port Townsend, Washington, some autumns back. It goes on. When we've gone out with the tide, it goes on. The cool morning curtain of fog that lifts to sun and warmth, the lazy clang of the channel boy, the fish and fishermen, sailors and ferry boats going about their business and pleasure, they go on. It all goes on. For me, it also brings, mortality brings curiosity, brings questions, and a call to living as vividly, as feeling as I can. And so here's a poem that raises some of those questions if you had to close the book. If you had to close the book of your life, prepare for an otherworldly fuga mundi, ready or not, here you go, forevermore, what would the last page, the end note, grace note be? The luminous face or close embrace of a great love? A simple, blissful childhood reverie? The first crisp taste of autumn at the green end of summer? And what table of its contents would you expose, to mark out the main chapters, the major chords, depth and breadth between birth and death of your living and loving, your seeking and discovering, if you knew you had to close the book? Something to ponder. As is great heartbreak, the end of a relationship, especially a close partnership, can alter our worlds profoundly in lots of different ways, depending on how we respond, take it in, can shake us immensely, but and also spur us on. And this was a poem I wrote, I dedicated for the soul. It's called Losing the Flow. That was after my own great heartbreak in life, one of them. For one who bathed body and spirit in its free-form currents, breathed in its fresh rushings, who lived and fished, loved and dreamt for lyrical years along its soft green banks, losing the flow, the natural course, wild coursing of a great river, comes as a bewildering surprise. You watch, amazed, dazed as the water recedes, then how you begin to devitalize like the earth before you that dries and cracks. Witness the water flowers wither, the birds and fish disappear, taking their bright songs and buoyant gestures with them. Feel a gnawing, dispiriting take hold, a growing emptiness you can't reverse. Experience your once flush, daily quenched feelings of desire, delight, wane, drain away like the whole vanishing river. You hang on, try to, for a time, caught in the loss, held in a hard press of longing, disbelieving, until the last remaining hope of this dear river's return evaporates. And you gather your parched, puzzled self and depart to seek out a new oasis, a life-giving source of another, even if lesser kind, to flow through the next seasons of your life, to keep your body, your soul likewise vitally streaming and ever moving, ever dreaming toward the sea. There are times in life, too, when, as you may know, you need to absolutely strip it down to the bare wood, the bare walls, to begin again all over, to start anew, to create new foundations and cornerstones. This is gut renovation. Stripping your life down to your bare walls, your innards, sometimes by choice, sometimes by force, by seismic events like great loss or divorce. Then starting over, starting fresh. This time with clear intention, wise design, deliberation, to build on the strengths and virtues of your sure inner structure, to create an inviting new living place for yourself that years and incarnations later you feel grand about inhabiting, daily thankful for renovating deep down in your gut. So on the other side of the losses and heartbreaks, or the heart makes the new beginnings of love and coming together as a couple, and places of possibility on that farther side of other side. And I think of the beauty and promise of beginning some couples make in marriage. And this was for two of my dearest friends, April and Brad, out in Denver. And I was at their magical wedding and read this poem to everybody for them as my toast. Jekyll Island in Georgia. It's called Lovers. Romeo and Juliet crossed stars. Abelard and Heloise faced swords. Lancelot prized Guinevere more than words, more than the fabled knights and whole kingdom of Camelot combined. Catherine and Heathcliff, we know, rose to wuthering, dizzying heights of desire. Rhett Butler and Scarlett O'Hara were swept away in a wild wind of romance. Damn the battles raging outside and within, and you, arching and shining into marriage. Lovers, passionately chosen partners, enter now with bliss and great promise into a deeply shared, doubly shaped future, into your own heartful, remarkable, and real life adventure. So coming into the final stretch of things for us, Seneca, the Roman philosopher, had much to say about a lot of things, life, endings, beginnings, and he spoke a lot about time, and especially the, quote, existential calculus of how we spend or waste the sliver of time allotted to us along the continuum of our being. So he wrote, in his final years, he wrote this to a friend. He was counseling a friend, and he said, set yourself free for your own sake. Gather and save your time, which till lately has been forced from you or filched away or has merely slipped from your hands. Certain moments are torn from us. Some are gently removed. Others glide beyond our reach. The most disgraceful kind of loss, however, is that due to carelessness. He felt that we couldn't slide through life in a trance of expectancy and vacate the present moment to lurch toward the next. It was a kind of a living death. And he said, what man can you show me who places any value on his time, who reckons the worth of each day, who understands that he is dying daily? Therefore, hold every hour in your grasp. Lay hold of today's task, and you will not need to depend so much upon tomorrow's. While we are postponing, life speeds by. Thank you, Seneca. Where are the Senecas today? We need some of them. There's an old Native American elder story. We were speaking about elders earlier, and then elderhood, true elderhood, and whether in a state or place or beginning or ending or otherwise, we're experiencing it's vital to be present, as Seneca was saying, and reverent too. And this is lost, this native story. Stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here, and you must treat it as a powerful stranger must ask permission to know it and be known. The forest breathes. Listen. It answers. I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again, saying, here. No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a bush does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. So, last piece is here. You're Jacob's ladder, because every step or leap of learning is a form of beginning, isn't it? A seeing and understanding from a new level with a wider, wiser lens. So, I wrote this a few years back. You're Jacob's ladder, not the ancient biblical or allegorical one brimming with symbolism, Kabbalism, virtuous as it is, but the more touchable one of learning about self and life you can use, lesson by lesson, to climb to higher places of seeing and being. Your ladder of awareness, worldly understanding, that enables you to lift at will from the earthbound to the aerial, above rooftops and treetops, over walls and fires, the way music can take you somewhere lighter, loftier, the way your passion, freed, can elevate and exhilarate your mind, spirit, molecules, the escalera, akaba, arawata of your own ever-making, to use often, consciously, ascendantly. And beginnings sparked me to close with these last poems. One, of course, about metamorphosis, becoming a butterfly, brightly colored, abundantly winged, lighter than air. To become one, you must climb out of your chrysalis, out of your carapace, your unmetamorphosed self. Discover, then enter your newer, truer form and fly off, fly forth, flutter freely into the wider, wilder world. And next to last, another blessing. We had one last week, and I thought this was a wonderful one too, from our man John O'Donohue, our great Irish man, poet, philosopher, life blesser. And so for our year ahead, and our lives ahead, this is for a new beginning. In out-of-the-way places of the heart where your thoughts never think to wander, this beginning has been quietly forming, waiting until you were ready to emerge. For a long time it has watched your desire, feeling the emptiness growing inside you, noticing how you willed yourself on, still unable to leave what you had outgrown. It watched you play with the seduction of safety and the gray promises that sameness whispered, heard the waves of turmoil rise and relent, wondered, would you always live like this? Then the delight, when your courage kindled, and out you stepped onto new ground. Your eyes young again with energy and dream, a path of plenitude opening before you. Though your destination is not yet clear, you can trust the promise of this opening. Unfurl yourself into the grace of beginning that is at one with your life's desire. Awaken your spirit to adventure. Hold nothing back. Learn to find ease in risk. Soon you'll be home in a new rhythm, for your soul senses the world that awaits you. Thank you, John O'Donohue. And here we are. Each beginning can be a more meaningful, metaphorical ending, but ending as in a new beginning. So this close as an opening of some kind, something to ponder below the surface. Opening like an anemone, like a hand, like a book, like an oyster, like an eye, like a passage, like a seed, like a frontier. Thank you again for listening in, for feeling in, and being part of these end-of-year sharings and contemplatings. And thank you so heartfully, all those lending support to these weekly programs in my poetic arts with donations and enthusiasms. Anyone interested can make contributions of any size by PayPal or Venmo or directly through my site. Know that every good word you send post-broadcast is a gift, as are invitations to bring me your way as a poet, artist in residence to create inspired new work for a month or a season ahead. Likewise, I encourage you sending me your questions. Plan to answer a cross-section of them in a special program in late January. Just email me yours to colin@thepoetorialist.com. Meanwhile, replays for all the programs are hearable and shareable. I invite you to lean in next week or soon again. Until then, dear listeners, here's to the best possible new year ahead for you and uplifting for us all. Keep your good spirits aglow.